Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Brainiac podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because it's going to be a lot about storytelling. And concussions are quite unique because they can be different for every person, and sharing experiences is a great way to learn more about how it can impact someone's life and help you support yourself and others when it comes to concussions. And so, in saying that, I'm so thrilled to be joined by Mandy MacLean. Similar to Dr. Hennis a few episodes ago, Mandy reached out to our chapter, told us she'd love to help us out. And I can't think of a better way to do that than by giving her the opportunity to share her story. So thank you so much, Mandy, for coming on today.
Hi, Stefan. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries.
Yeah, I thought, I found the podcast, I found the work you guys are doing, and I thought that it was really important because I think for me, the biggest challenge I had while recovering from my most recent condition is that I didn't feel like there was anyone to advocate for
Mhm,
me as an individual in the process. And I often felt that like I was left to my own devices, both in the healthcare system and also in terms of my employment, and to kind of vouch for myself and say that, like I'm not okay, and my
mhm,
my symptoms should be taken seriously, and like I didn't feel like there was anywhere really to turn for help, and I found
mhm.
myself often kind of like not knowing where to go, and then
Yeah.
found a route finally at the very end.
Mhm,
And I think, since I am an actor, and I mentioned to you previously, I work in private home childcare, like, so,
mhm.
two heavily unregulated areas of employment. I think it's important to like find it in oneself to be an advocate, but also kind of
Yeah,
like, I think what needs to happen right now systemically is that the care for concussions and the care for and the respect for like that being a very serious injury is something that I think is shifting but needs to shift further. And I
absolutely.
think, for me it was really difficult to be honest, to be taken seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great points and really sort of give a good overview of what we're going to talk more about today. Um, So since I believe this is the first time we've had an artist or an actor on our show, I'd love to hear a little bit about your acting journey, why you decided to pursue acting, how you got started, just so our audience and myself get to know you a little bit better before we jump into maybe the concussion specific conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's also something that I think is probably important too, because I am not an athlete. I'm not someone that like,
Hmm.
so I think it's important to offer a perspective that isn't someone that's in like a heavily contact or physical or like maybe construction work or someone that you think would encounter an injury like this, because
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
not those things. And I think, so acting. So I'm an actor. I'm from the East Coast. I moved to Toronto in 2009 after an undergrad degree out there to study at Humber College. I graduated Humber College in 2012. I've been pursuing acting in Toronto since. I do theater and film and TV. It's a very difficult business, and I think it's a wonderful business, but it can also, is just as wonderful it is can be just as challenging. And it's an industry in the same way a trade would be an industry. And I think the biggest thing that I tell when I teach as well, and the biggest thing that I tell students whenever I teach or coach, is that like, as much as acting is really great, like there are very few people that make a living in our country fully by doing that. So you have to figure out things that you love to do that can also allow and pair up nicely with your work as an artist. And I think for me, that's always been working with young people. And so I work as a drama teacher and as private childcare, like as a nanny, to be honest, and like as a tutor on top of being an actor. And I think the two pair quite nicely because it allows me to kind of like get my things out into a space and be
Hmm.
silly and be fun and like all of those kinds of things. But how those two things are both related in terms of a serious injury is that they're both two heavily unregulated fields of employment. I am a union member, but and the union's wonderful, and I fully support my union and all of those kinds of things for acting. But there's only so much a union can do in terms of an injury that still is trying to find its footing in the actual provincial healthcare system. And so for me, it was a very difficult journey of like being taken seriously and, you know, not knowing where to go to for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. You know, you spoke earlier, a great point you made was that maybe someone wouldn't think that someone in your position would be exposed to the risk of concussion. I think that's a great point. It's a great reason to have you on to demonstrate that
Yeah.
perspective. And
I
you know,
think, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead, no worries.
I think, yeah, I think for me, whenever I tell people, like, two things happen. So my concussion, I've had two major concussions.
Okay.
My first concussion happened, I think, in my third year of university. So I'm 34. So, and no, I was in university from 2005 to 2009. So I think it would have happened in 2006 or seven,
Mm-hmm.
right before when I was in the middle of university. I slipped on ice and fell and cracked my head and had like a very serious hematoma,
Oh,
and a
wow.
skull fracture, just the way I hit my head. And like,
Mm-hmm.
at the time, like that's like almost 15 years ago now. So it's like I can't do math that fast, but you get what I mean? Like, it's a long enough ago time that now in a lot of ways concussions are taken very differently. And like, it was my most recent concussion here was 3 years ago, in 2019. And I hit my head on the back of a bed frame. I fell back into a bed in the dark, completely sober. And people
Yeah.
often ask me like, did you have a few drinks? And I go, no, it was just like a klutzy thing in the dark.
Yeah.
I threw myself back on a bed frame and cracked my head on a teak headboard of a bed, and in the dark, not knowing it was there, and like wanged my head really hard, and like woke up the next day with a headache. And like was thought that I was fine, went to the emergency room to see it, like if, you know, there was anything they could do. They told me to go home, and 2 hours later I went home and took a nap, and 2 hours later I wasn't able to see, and like was having very serious visual symptoms. My experience in the waiting room was that I was told, you know, like I was told by a doctor in Emerge that like I was fine, go home and rest. You know, we can't really treat a concussion. All we can do is send you home. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not okay, you know?
Yeah.
And I mentioned this to you in my email that like, as someone with a mental health disorder, that's on my file attached to
Mm-hmm.
my OHIP card. And he said, well, are you like experiencing stress and anxiety? And I said, well, yeah. And he was like, well, I think you're going to be fine. So immediately I felt like, immediately it was presumed that because I'm someone with mental health issues, it was like escalated and my symptoms were seen as like not real,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because
Mm-hmm.
stress and anxiety and depression are symptoms of a concussion. So
Yeah.
it was like immediately it was put on me that like, well, she's just like her feelings and how she's feeling right now are heightened because of her anxiety. They aren't actually truthful symptoms. And so I went home that night, went to bed, and woke up 2 hours later and like couldn't see, and was having like
Wow.
very serious visual symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Went back to Emerge, and again was told to like go home and rest. It'll get better. It'll be fine. Had an appointment with my family doctor that week. The family doctor was like, it'll be fine. Go home and rest. And it was like, I cannot rest. I cannot see. I cannot work.
Mm-hmm.
What do I like? There's only so much sleep can do. And I think the
For sure.
assumption the entire time was, I felt like it was put on me that, you know, a lot of this is just the stress of the injury, and that, you know, you're experiencing this because you just have to stay calm, Mandy. Stay calm down,
Yeah.
go take a bath. And it was like, I can't actually see.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like,
that's
so what happened is that my vision was blocked. My peripheral vision was completely blocked. And so
mhm.
the line of your vision where the injury took place, I guess I injured my occipital nerve,
Mhm.
and like I couldn't see the any of my peripheral or central vision. So I had tunnel vision essentially.
Wow.
And so turns out, funny enough, and this is important to my story too, a colleague of mine within that same week hit her head on a window frame and had a concussion went to emerge within a week of me at the same hospital. And because she was having speech issues, her symptoms showed up as speech issues. She was immediately rushed into care that was completely covered by OHIP.
Mm.
So she
Wow.
went to see a neuro specialist. She went to see like all these different things that because she showed up with visible symptoms, they took her more seriously. But because mine wasn't a symptom you could see,
Yeah,
it was like, we'll just go home and rest.
that's a
Yeah.
huge
And so,
problem.
yeah. And I went and I spoke to my doctor about that. And they were like, well, my doctor was very supportive, but at the same
Hmm.
time, there wasn't anything she could do. And I said, like, why is it that this friend of mine, let's call her Nancy, that's not her name, but let's say Nancy, just for
Hmm.
clarity's sake. Why is it that Nancy was rushed to like a neuro specialist in Toronto Western and I wasn't taking it seriously? Well, she said there's no mandate or standard of care for a concussion right now in Ontario. And it was like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah,
Like, how do I navigate this completely on my own? And she was like, there's nothing to do. You just have like, you don't have health insurance. There's nothing to be done. And I was like, well, I can't see. Like, what do I
yeah,
do?
that's
Like I was like,
for
I don't know
sure.
I can't work. I can't, so I just started Googling things and
Hmm.
um, I found a neuro ophthalmologist that I had a
Yeah.
consultation with. And she sent me to a rehab clinic in Etobicoke
Hmm.
that I found really helpful. They put me on an anti-inflammatory diet, and then I started getting like vision therapy, and the vision therapy was probably like, I think it was like $150 an hour visit, and I went
Wow.
2 times. Yeah, like I went 2 times a week for like 8 weeks.
Holy
Like I
smokes.
spent thousands of dollars, and
Mm-hmm.
like and none of it's covered by the province
Yeah.
because I didn't get immediately rushed into any care provided by OHIP that night in emerge, right? So like it's all out of my own pocket. And like I remember thinking at that time, like, this is a very serious injury. Like
For sure. Yeah.
why is it that like, I feel like in a sense, again, like what we said at the beginning, if I had shown up as like a football player from U of T or like a high school football player, I think they would have taken me more seriously. I
Yeah, I
think,
think
as a woman sitting there that has anxiety saying, I'm having trouble seeing and have a headache, they think, well, you just have anxiety, go home. And
yeah.
it's like, I remember even like having a conversation with the person I was working for as my employer at the time. And like, and what they did in vision therapy, they blocked out the center part of my vision of my glasses with tape to kind of
Mm-hmm.
create the same effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that as like a care, but to kind of like, essentially they explained to me that it was like DIY prisms. So instead of actually giving you a prescription for your glasses that have prisms, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of like fakes your brain into thinking that you have prism lenses.
Yeah.
And then slowly with the vision therapy, so I had to wear tape on my glasses at work every day for like 2 months. And I remember her actually like being like, do you actually need to wear those? And I was like, I don't like, and I remember I got really upset that day because I remember
Yeah.
thinking like, if I broke my arm, no one would be asking me if I need to wear a cast.
Yeah. You're
Nobody would be saying, well, probably it's just in your head and you're having anxiety. And it
yeah.
was like,
You're right.
like, uh, or like, you're an actor, so you're just being dramatic. And it was like, no, like, dude, I can't actually see you. Like, I think this is very serious.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like this colleague of mine that also had a concussion at the same time. All of her care was covered by OHIP. She got seen by the best doctors in the province at Toronto Western, like the neuro clinic at Toronto, like
Yeah.
everything, because the same emergency room she showed up and they could see her symptoms. Like they could hear, like she was slurring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
And
so because of that, they like expedited her care immediately. And like,
that's
yeah. And I think, I mean, like this is for a podcast, but I'm gonna be transparent. Like I am a white
yeah.
woman. I am Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
And like I can't imagine sitting in that emergency room it's bad enough that my care was like, I was treated a certain way because I am a patient that had a mental illness, like that, that's on my file, that I, have severe anxiety and depression. And like, they can see that in my medical history.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad enough that I was treated differently because of that. I can't imagine if I had walked into that emergency room, a woman with mental health, with all of that in my file, and been a person of color.
Yeah.
Like I would have
It's a
been
great
treated,
point.
I assume that I would have been even taken less seriously. I can only make that assumption that even my whiteness, like I was not treated well, I would have been probably treated worse if I
Yeah.
was someone that was like of a further intersectional identity.
Yeah. I
And
think
I
that's
think,
logical.
yeah, and I think that, if I had walked in there as a man, as a big, strong, burly football player, or like something like that, I think probably it would have been seen as more real. Or if I had walked in with like, I don't know, like Nancy, speech issues, or like,
Yeah. Balance.
and like, but because it was a visual symptom,
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't experience what I was experiencing internally. And
Yeah.
so I ended up paying thousands of dollars. And like, it worked in the end. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing but amazing things to say about Dr. Blanc and her therapy at her clinic, because I don't know what I would have done without it. But like, it was outrageously expensive.
Yeah. And that's a shame that you have to, because there were certain things in place that prevented you from, getting the care you deserved at first. You ended up not only getting care late, but then you had to take that financial burden on yourself when otherwise you shouldn't have had to do that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that, yes, concussions are being thought of as something more serious now than they were when I initially had my first concussion in university. But at the same time, I think it's so problematic that we don't have a standard of care. And because it's an internal injury, we don't see,
Yeah.
like my employer at the time should have given me time off, paid time
Absolutely.
off, and there should have been paid sick days associated to my care, but there wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah.
and then that's just one side of my employment. In a professional theater rehearsal, I came right up to the director at the very beginning and outset and said, this is what I'm still recovering from. If you see me switching glasses, I'm sensitive to fluorescence, so I'm just trying to figure out like what the best kind of
Mm-hmm.
what I need to do to set myself up for success. And again,
Yeah.
that wasn't taken seriously. So
Really.
I think there's like, yeah, so I think there's like this huge misunderstanding around this injury, especially when it doesn't have external symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
That, and especially I think as a woman, I think
Mm-hmm.
that like I have one card stacked against me being female.
Yeah.
I have another card stacked against me that like I'm an artist, and
Mm-hmm.
that's my weird living is being made being an artist. I'm another card stacked against me being like someone with a mental health issue. So it's like, I think all of that, and then take that even one step further. If I was a person of color, I think we've got to figure out a way to like, it shouldn't be I'm the injured one. It shouldn't be on me as the person who's injured to be my advocate. I had to
Yeah.
be, and I think that that's what I would offer anyone else that's dealing with this injury, is that like you have to advocate for your needs, and you have to find someone who's going to take you seriously, because probably they're not. Probably
Mm-hmm.
most of the people you talk to are going to say, go sit in a dark room and take a nap. And it's like, that's actually not what we need. And science has proven that like there is
Yeah.
more care that's associated with this injury. And I think, you know, it's just people don't seem to take it. Like if someone was having an asthma attack, you would address it immediately. But if someone's having a panic attack associated with a head injury,
Yeah.
it's the conversation surrounding mental health, because we don't see it is something that's happening internally, and therefore like we can't assess it because we can't understand it from that person's perspective.
Yeah.
An asthma
100%.
attack or a broken arm is like really quite simple to address by comparison.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because again, like my colleague Nancy that had a concussion too, she walked in slurring. I walked in not being able to see. Like the symptoms are so incredibly varied,
Yeah. And
and
that's
another
the
person could have
nature.
walked in, yeah, the same night, and like had no symptoms. Like every person's body reacts differently to this type of injury. And it's like, it's just like, we just don't know enough. And I
Yeah.
think that the problem I have that I encountered in every area during my recovery, even with the doctors who were amazing, is that like, I remember once the rehabilitation doctor that I went to was like, we're going to try acupuncture. And I was like, but we've done that and it doesn't work. Like, I need you to
Yeah.
do something else.
Yeah.
You know, like even him, and he was incredible, but it's, you know,
Hmm.
like it shouldn't be on the person that's the patient to have to advocate for themselves, but you have to. And
Yeah,
that's
you're right,
just where we're
especially
at.
with an injury like concussion, because like through your story, I think I've kind of among many things realized like two things. And one is that concussion is still being learned about, and maybe
Yeah.
emergency doctors and general practitioners don't understand it as well as maybe they should, which
No.
is which is a consequence of just how new the injury is, but also maybe a bias towards not taking it as seriously as it needs to be taken.
Yeah, and I think too there is problems because it is an injury that's often associated with mental health,
Yeah.
and it is an injury that's also associated with vision and like and things that aren't covered by provincial health care. That it's like because of that bureaucratic issue, there aren't systems in the infrastructure of Emerge and places like that to be able to
Yeah.
like really address it. And I
Hmm.
think that that's like the political side of me actually finds that like incredibly problematic.
For
That it's
sure.
like we have a place like CAMH that's dedicated to provincial mental health care, but yet someone can walk into Emerge and do a mental health assessment because of a concussion and be 10 minutes they can be back out on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
You
I
know, like
this
there's
the stigma of mental health really like shines through in cases like this. It still shows that although there's been a lot of progress, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
yeah, I think too, yeah, and I think there's issues of gender that are involved
100%. Yeah.
because we do see this as like a male injury, you
Hmm.
know? Like immediately when I've told people the story of my of how I got my concussion and they say, "Oh, you threw yourself back in a bed, eh? What were you doing?"
Mm.
And it's like, "What?" Like
That's
the,
disrespectful on so many levels. But
no, I was just tired and klutzy, to be
yeah.
totally sincere. Like it,
Hmm.
you know, like it was just the dark and I was like tired and klutzy and like had a stupid accident that like really messed with like a year of my life. Um,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, like I think there's like, there's issues of race, there's issues of gender, there's issues of like socioeconomic that come into play because like I don't have health insurance. So I think there's different
Hmm.
things that I would have had access to if I'd had health coverage that I could have pulled from during that time. And I think, you know, I couldn't take time off work because I had to pay for my vision care.
Hmm.
And if I
Yeah,
had, if,
that's
you know, like and I would have recovered faster if I had health coverage to be able to access that and care for myself, you know?
hmm. Hmm.
And I think these are all things that are coming into question now too. I think especially with COVID-19 that we're becoming more aware of this idea that like people need paid sick leave and like people
Yeah.
need and like everyone experiences that issue differently due to their race, due to their gender, due to their socioeconomic status. And I think uh you know like my need for a paid sick day as a Caucasian settler woman in her mid 30s who's unmarried without children is like a very different need than someone who works at the Amazon factory in Brampton who's a person of color and has 4 kids to feed. Like they're both
Hmm.
it's like it's a very like um it's a hugely like varied issue. I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but like
Yeah.
everyone's experience of that need is very, very specific and very different. And I think that will aid this conversation of like when someone has a non-visible injury, what that looks like.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I just think it's like I would have recovered a lot faster if I had felt like I didn't have to struggle to find care and I didn't have to struggle to
Yeah.
like and like constantly have to go, like I constantly had to go, but I can't see. There has to be something that can be done to fix this.
Were the doctors or the people you were speaking to not believe that you couldn't see, or were they sort of like, well, not much I can do, sorry?
Every single doctor I saw before I found the rehabilitation clinic in Etobicoke
Hmm.
told me to go home and rest.
So it wasn't like a matter of, maybe it was a bit of not believing you, but they didn't know where to go other than
I
say
think
go
they
home and
did
rest.
know where to go. I think
Hmm.
like they were like, there's no other standard treatment for a concussion other than rest. I got that script a lot. And I was
Achieving
like,
in
well,
2019, like research was pretty like,
I know,
you know,
but if
conclusive
you
that
walk in,
that's a part of the problem
yeah, like
for
if you
sure.
walk into an emergency room right now, I guarantee you they will
For
tell you
sure.
just to go home and rest.
You're
That
right.
an
I
emergency
believe
room
it.
doctor doesn't have uh like they don't have the skill set and the resources and the infrastructure to support this kind of injury
Hmm.
at all. And I don't even think like a family doctor would, because
Definitely
like,
not.
like I think it's like, and I don't know what needs to change in order to do that. Like I found this rehabilitation clinic by like Google, and like
Yeah.
if I hadn't have found it, and like he was amazing. He wasn't
Hmm.
perfect, like he wasn't perfect, but like he was the best I could find. And then I got
Yeah.
hooked up through him to Dr. Blanc, Shirley Blanc in Yorkville.
Yeah.
And the combination of the two of them working in tandem was like what I actually needed at that time.
Hmm.
Um, and if I hadn't have done that, and if I hadn't have had a bank account of emergency money set aside, I don't know where I would be.
It's a great point. That's a
Like
great point.
I probably still wouldn't be able to see, because I
Hmm.
wouldn't have known where to turn. And like
Yeah.
I basically spent a month from the date of the injury to the actual first appointment at the rehabilitation clinic. I think it was a month of
Wow.
I went to my family doctor. I went back to Emerge. I went for a massage. I went to a regular ophthalmologist just to get the regular ophthalmologist to check my eyes. And like, no one knew what to do.
Yeah.
And it
And
was like,
that one sounds exhausting. And so my question is, this is clearly a story about advocacy, and it's clear that there are a lot of barriers in place, and it can be really frustrating to constantly have to advocate for yourself. But how did you find sort of the courage and the willpower to keep advocating for yourself and keep going when it looked bleak at times?
I think I was very lucky that um sorry, I'm talking to you on my phone and two texts just popped up.
No
Sorry.
worries. No
I was
worries.
like, I thought that I'd shut them off, and it was like ba-ding, ba-ding. Uh how did I find it was really hard. It was
Hmm.
really hard. Like my boss didn't think it was real. Like even my mother, bless her, was kind of like, I think you might be okay. And it was like,
Hmm.
no, like, at the time I was single. My best friend Leah is a wonderful human. I've known her over 10 years now. She If I hadn't have had her during that time, and her previous understanding and appreciation and respect for issues of mental health and
Hmm.
understanding of who I was as a person during that period, I don't know what I would have done. I'm very lucky that she comes from a family that takes mental health very seriously, and like her perspective on mental health that I think is I think the right way that we should all approach it, is that if someone has asthma, they know their triggers and they know that they can't go into that barn, or if they choose to go into that barn, they have to like take things very carefully and like figure out a way to like harm reduction
Hmm.
essentially.
Yeah.
And like that's, I guess, yeah, that would be the best summary of it. It would be to approach mental health and like triggers and symptoms with this attitude of harm reduction. And
Hmm.
like, because she comes from a family that feels that way, and kind of that was her upbringing, it was not mine. uh,
Hmm.
I'm very, very lucky that she immediately was like, okay, what can we do? How can we put what are action items we can do to make you feel better? What can we do to like, but then again, that should be coming from the healthcare system.
You're right. You're absolutely right
like
about that.
I'm very lucky that I had that. But if I hadn't have had that, I would be in a hole. Like, like that should have been, I should have walked into my family doctor, and that should have been the conversation I had with my family doctor. I should have walked into that emergency room, and they should have went, okay, Mandy, this. We're going to send you over here. Go home and rest. Tomorrow morning, you have an appointment here.
Yeah.
The emergency room popped me 4 Tylenol and sent me home. And it was like,
that's shocking.
Yeah, it was shocking. And considering what they did to someone else I know 4 days later.
Yeah.
And I think, I found the strength to keep going. I guess like things like like researching other people's story, finding, you guys online, and like following you on Instagram, and like just being like honest with people about how I was feeling, and like leaning on my best friend Leah, and like her being like, we're going to get through this. Like we had because there was a point where I even thought like, maybe they're right. Maybe this is just my anxiety. Like maybe I would be feeling different right now if I didn't have all this anxiety attached to it. And then I had to remind myself that like, actually that doesn't matter. Like, actually, like that anxiety, if it is actually anxiety, is just as real of a symptom as a broken heart. Like I had to like constantly have this push and pull between myself of like, maybe they're right. And it's like, no, like, what's happening in your own body. You know what you need. You've got to set yourself up for success, and find the team around, because not everyone's going to take you seriously. No, most people are not going to take you seriously.
Yeah.
So you've got to find like your people and your core team around you that's going to be like, what can I do? Like I remember one night she came over and made me dinner because like I couldn't move. Like I was in so much discomfort.
That's great.
And it was, but like, again, I shouldn't have, a month out of a major injury, still not had a health practitioner not assisting me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Absolutely.
But it's like, you've got to find, because not everyone is going to take you seriously. Not everyone is going to see your symptoms as real.
Yeah.
And, don't be discouraged by that, because I think, try not to be discouraged by that, because it is very discouraging. Try to remind yourself that like, we're at a point in this conversation that we just need to keep going farther. It's so much better than it was 5-10 years ago, but it's like, we don't know enough about this injury, and we don't know enough about how to have conversations surrounding mental health about it, that you just have to remind yourself that like, that person, my mom, your other friend, isn't taking me seriously right now, or doesn't see what I'm going through as real. So I'm not going to lean on that person right now. I'm going to go lean on the person that actually like sees what I'm going through and validates, and I mean, not even validation, but like actually sees you and what you're struggling with
a little bit more. Yeah. And that speaks really to the importance of social support, which has become a really big theme within the concussion research that I've come to realize more and more. And it's a vitally important part because of its ties into mental health and isolation at times. Like having that person in your corner is so important, especially for an injury like this, that a lot of people don't appreciate the significance of.
Yeah, it's huge. Like I don't know what I would have done without having a person that was just like, yep. And it was really hot. Like they gave me things like, at the clinic I went to, they gave me like an app to track my symptoms. They gave me like all of those kinds of things. And I was like, to me, this isn't helpful. Like what I actually need is being able to go to my friend Leah, and Leah to be like, well, you actually are better than you were a week ago. You've got to figure out like, no, it's like acting in a way, right? Like it's like training in a kind of like, it's like not every teacher, not every person you have is going to offer you advice that's going to be the right exact fix, but you've got to take like a little bit from here, and you've got to take a little bit from here, and you've got to take the support from your friend, and you've got to like together formulate this, like, I mean, this is a podcast, so people can't see the amazing hand gestures I'm doing right now. But like, you've got to figure out this like package of like, this is the care I need right now. Cause not any one thing is going to be perfect.
Yeah. And like you said, you having to figure out that package of healthcare shouldn't fall on you.
Not at all. It should be like, you should want, and I think that's a larger problem with the healthcare system, is that like most people our age don't have a family doctor downtown Toronto. You know, like I'm very lucky that I'm a member of the Artist Health Clinic at Toronto Western, because I am a professional artist, and like I have access to that care for that reason. So in that sense, I was lucky, but that doctor didn't help me with this.
No. Yeah.
You know, like, it's like, I think, yeah, like, you know, it's so much of it comes from like just the larger conversation of access to healthcare, you know, for someone who's like a young person living in a downtown core. And then that calls into questions issues of gender and race and socioeconomics, and like maybe you work a job that you have health coverage so you can get in fast, and like all those kinds of things. And like, it's a very layered thing, but I think at the crux of it, the main issue is that like, you've got to figure out what you need, because there is no like standard of care. I don't care what anybody says. Like, anybody in the world can tell me that yeah, that's what you do for a concussion. And I was like, no, like, I had 4 professional healthcare practitioners working on me when I was during that 8-week period, and not everything one of them said worked. You know, like,
it's such a complex injury. Like, it's so many things are going on at once, and it affects
and they'd be like,
differently.
Try this. Well, it's not working. Try this. And it would be like, it's such a complex injury that like, you just have to like, like read and find, piece together a care plan that like, I think that's the right word for it, a care plan. Like, piece together a care plan that like works for you and what you need. And if you need more help, ask for it, because like, you have to push for help. And like, again, it shouldn't be put on the injured person to be their own advocate. But until we reach a place in this conversation that that's not the case, you have to be your own advocate. You have to say, I don't like that. That's not working. We need to find a different answer. Because if a health practitioner doesn't hear that and take it seriously, they're not the right health practitioner, you know? Like, a really good health practitioner is going to go, okay, you're right, this isn't working. We need to try something else, you know?
I think that's a great point, and a great sort of key message to take away from this conversation is identifying supports in your life, and then being an advocate for yourself, because you know yourself and your body better than anybody, and people may claim to know it better than you, but that's not ever the case. So just being again, confident in what you know about yourself, and taking that to advocate for yourself is huge. And it's hard to do, but like you said, it's vital.
I think I want to make one more point, that I also, and I hope someone hears this if they're in the similar position that I'm going to just say, you know, I spent a lot of time feeling really angry that I had to like be my own advocate, and like, you know, I sat in the frustration of that, rather than like, right now I'm in a place, well, of course I had to be my own advocate. We don't know anything about concussions, and like the conversation around mental health is still a thing in process. You know, 3 years, 4 years later, I can see all of those things. But at the time I was so angry that I was just like, why can't I find someone that takes me seriously? Why can't, you know, my, you know, boss give me a day off? Like, none of that's going to help you. You know, like I really strongly think that it's like, you've got to like place intention on like really finding that care plan that works for you, and let everything else fall away. Because what's the biggest priority is like, you've got to address your symptoms immediately. You cannot wait, because it might take a long time to get them fixed. And don't give up. Like, I still experience symptoms today. And like,
I believe it.
And I say that, like, a couple weeks ago, I was with my partner and I twisted my neck an odd way. And then like my eyesight started to go crazy. And it was like, and then, it calmed
Wow.
down and I had a glass of water and like I sat for a minute and like put a hot pad on my neck. But it's all related to where exactly my injury occurred, right? Like it's so
Mm-hmm.
specific because of where I actually hit the back of my head.
Yeah.
And like, that couple day period, I hadn't been getting a lot of sleep. I was heavily stressed. And then all of a sudden I pulled my neck and couldn't see. And I was
Cool.
just like, so you've got to address your symptoms early. Don't give up, keep addressing them and keep working towards like finding the way to address them that works for you.
Yeah. I think that's a great message. I think a lot of what you said can hopefully, be listened, like heard and understood by those listening. And if people are in a similar position to you that you were in a few years ago, hopefully they can take a lot from this. I do just want to be conscious of time. We only have a few minutes
Yeah.
left. Don't want to take too much of your time. I do really, really appreciate you've taken the time to come on today. It's been not only a learning experience for me, but I hope for many others listening. So thank you again for taking the time to come on today.
No problem. I'm so grateful. And like, I just hope someone hears this that like can, it gives them strength to not give up in their care plan of trying to get better, because it is really, really hard when
Mm-hmm.
you don't have anyone, even a medical doctor, not helping you. We're trained in our society to believe that they're there to help you. And it's like, they're humans too, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
don't have all the information and all the answers.
Yeah.
And I think we see that after COVID-19, we see that more, we have a greater realization of like the healthcare system actually kind of sucks sometimes,
Sometimes,
like,
yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes it does. Yeah.
I mean, that's not a criticism of health practitioners.
No,
It's been like a terrible year for them. I mean, like the greater
just in
infrastructure of
general.
like
In general, yeah.
accessing care is like
It's tough.
sometimes really shitty and like
Mm-hmm.
really hard. And like people who are poor and people who are people of color and all of those kinds of things have a great harder time with those things than someone who is Caucasian and middle class and works a job and has health insurance. So it's like, I think now post COVID-19, we have a greater understanding of what it means to access healthcare. So I think this conversation hopefully will look different in another year or two as a result.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too. And just before we wrap up, thanks again for that.
No
Just a
problem. Thank
quick
you.
summary and wrap up. I just want to give you the opportunity to let our listeners know where they can maybe find your work and follow you
Oh,
after this episode if they'd like to.
oh, sure. I am online. My website is mandymaclean.com. I
Awesome.
work in film and TV and theater and can teach your kids how to pretend to be a lion.
Awesome.
Like,
Awesome.
awesome. Thank you so much for having
Yeah.
me.
Thanks so much, Mandy. And take care, everybody. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next month for a new episode.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, man. HeadCheck Health bridges gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Trek Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. The music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound, www.bensound.com.